Augustus did everything to prevent him from becoming emperor. However, in the end, Tiberius managed to surpass all his competitors and secured the position of the second Roman emperor. But how did he achieve this position? And why was he so rejected by Augustus? Tiberius' family fled Rome to understand this. We need to go back to the year 42 BC. Just a few years had passed since Julius Caesar. Tiberius's father, named Tiberius Claudius, was a man who frequently changed sides, initially supporting Julius Caesar during the civil war against Pompey. He later praised the senators who took Caesar's life. It was then that Claudius Nero decided to ally himself with Marcus Antonius's brother, Lucius Antonius, during the Pyrrhon War, inciting a rebellion against Octavian. He did this by gathering troops of discontented veterans, leading to a destructive war that caused much devastation, including the life of Tiberius's grandfather. In the year 42 BC, Tiberius's family faced numerous adversities and upheavals because of Lucius Antonius's defeat, forcing Tiberius's father to flee to Sicily and then to Greece. Tiberius's mother, Livia Drusilla, was a person of high prestige in Rome, much more than her husband. She was from the Claudian dynasty of the patrician clan. In November 42 BC, at just 17 years old, Livia gave birth to her first child, whom she named Tiberius Claudius Nero. After many hardships, 35 years later, in the year 39 BC, Tiberius's family managed to return to Rome, but still faced personal problems. They were short of money and struggled to recover their confiscated properties. However, they managed to secure a more promising future for Tiberius by arranging for him to be adopted by a wealthy senator in the same year they arrived in Rome. Livia became pregnant with her second child, Nero Claudius Drusus, upon their return to Rome. Besides financial problems upon arriving in Rome, the couple also faced a fidelity test because Octavian became interested in Livia, and she began to reciprocate. They became lovers, and Livia seemed to see less of a future in staying with her husband, who by then had ended his career. At that time, Octavian was only 24 years old, and Livia was less than 20. Octavian decided to divorce Scribonia as soon as she gave birth to their daughter Julia. Generally, for a Roman husband to divorce his wife, he only needed to say the phrase, "Take your things with you." In this case, Octavian added as a reason for his divorce that he could no longer bear Scribonia's bitter personality. In the case of Tiberius's father, he amicably divorced Livia, and by early October 39, Octavian and Livia were already engaged. Livia moved to live in Octavian's house as his fiancée, and it was there that on January 1438, she gave birth to Drusus, who was later sent to be raised. Just 3 days after giving birth, on January 17, Livia and Octavian married. Her father had already died, and she seemed to have few close male relatives, so her ex-husband, Claudius Nero, accompanied her to the ceremony. Several years passed, and in 32 BC, Tiberius's father died. With his father's death, he and his brother Drusus went to live with Livia and Augustus alongside the emperor's daughter Julia and his cousin Marcellus. At the age of 13, Tiberius had the opportunity to participate in the triumphal parade of his adoptive father, who was celebrating victory over Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium. At that moment, Tiberius rode on horseback and paraded alongside Augustus during the procession, marking one of his early public appearances. Militarily and politically, under Augustus, who was already emperor and about 40 years old, he became very ill and almost died. From that moment on, he began to consider a series of possible heirs, including young Tiberius, and therefore, at the age of 17, Tiberius began to be trained and officially entered politics, holding the position of quaestor under Augustus's direct guidance. In addition, he had the privilege of running for praetor and consul years earlier than required by law. At just under 20 years old, Tiberius was already in charge of a large army. His participation in military campaigns, especially in the confrontation with the Parthian Empire, solidified his reputation as a skilled and strategic leader. Around 20 BC, at about 22 years old, Tiberius headed east to join Augustus, with the urgent need to reverse Roman losses at the hands of the Parthian Empire. The rescue of the Roman legion standards that had been lost during previous clashes became a priority. This drove Tiberius to lead bolder and more decisive campaigns. His intervention in Armenia aimed to turn it into a Roman client state, triggering a series of delicate negotiations with the Parthian Empire that resulted in an agreement re-establishing the region's neutrality, while his brother Drusus was recognized by the legions for being more charismatic and for winning the hearts of his troops and the Roman people. Tiberius was less charismatic, known for his strict discipline and direct approach. These qualities made him more respected, but also kept him distant from his troops. In 9 BC, while on a campaign in Germania, Drusus died from a horsefall. Despite being close to him, Tiberius avoided excessive mourning, believing that showing sadness in front of people would denote weakness on his part. Traveling with Drusus' body to Rome, he participated in honors and received honors for his own military achievements. Thus, Tiberius began to assume Drusus' role in Germania. This tragedy, which happened to Drusus, once again shook the structure of the imperial succession. He was the third person to die among those considered by Augustus for succession to the throne. Both the influenza and Augustus's nephew Marcellus had already died, and now finally Drusus. This further propelled Tiberius into the center of his political and military ascension, especially in Pannonia and Germania, reinforced his position as Augustus's Augustus forced Tiberius to divorce. As Tiberius advanced in his career, his political and military activities gained prominence, leading him to make some strategic alliances to assume increasingly larger leadership positions. One of these alliances was his marriage to Vipsania Agrippa, the daughter of General Agrippa. However, after Agrippa's death, Augustus forced Tiberius to separate from Vipsania, who was also pregnant at the time, to marry his daughter Julia, who was widowed by Agrippa. Although Tiberius loved his former wife, his new marriage to the emperor's daughter further boosted his position in the imperial succession. Besides, Tiberius's achievements in Germania raised his profile, gaining considerable recognition 3 years after Augustus's death. Tiberius sought to distance himself from Rome. In 6 BC, Augustus granted Tiberius tribune powers, which sent him to Agrippa in the eastern regions of the empire. However, Augustus's strategic appointment actually aimed to distance Tiberius from Rome, as the two heirs and grandsons of Augustus, called Gaius and Lucius, were growing in influence in Rome. So, without Augustus's imagination, Tiberius ended up refusing his mission in the east, which left Augustus very angry. This refusal ended up in the Senate, with Augustus complaining of being abandoned and betrayed by Tiberius. The motivations behind this act by Tiberius may have been twofold. First, his new marriage to Julia's attention, and second, the perception that Augustus would favor his grandsons as heirs, distancing Tiberius from the imperial succession. After this, Tiberius was exiled to Rhodes.
In a twist of fate, Tiberius decided to exile himself to the island of Rhodes. This episode, marked by isolation and some difficult choices, unveils a very intriguing phase of Tiberius's life. Upon arriving on the Greek island, he sought to live in relative isolation. In his absence, Augustus continued to favor his grandsons beyond the usual norms. Meanwhile, Tiberius received news that his wife Julia had been banished from Rome. It turns out that Augustus received information that she had behaved immorally and therefore decided to exile her. Julia died of starvation in her exile in the year 14 AD. This not only shook Tiberius's relationship with Augustus, but also left him in a much more vulnerable position before the eventual death of the emperor. Between 2 and 1 BC, Tiberius asked to return to Rome, but his request was denied by Augustus, leaving Tiberius in Rhodes against his will. These events cast a shadow over the years between 2 and 1 BC, considered by historian Suetonius as the lowest and most insecure point in Tiberius's life, describing even the falling statues of Tiberius and the growing hostility, putting his life in danger. After some years in exile, in 2 AD, Augustus's grandson Gaius allowed Tiberius to return to Rome, but he had to stay away from public life. Although restricted from holding offices, Tiberius was back in the corridors of power. However, as usual, the scene in Rome changed completely, and in this case Augustus's 2 grandsons died shortly after Tiberius returned to Rome.